Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Eileen Chevalier, and today we're going to talk about the transportation of fluids in plants. The most common fluid in the world is water, and no living thing can survive without it. How do plants drink water, and how do they move it around? In this lesson, we'll look at how and why plants move and use water and other fluids. So the materials that we're going to use in this lesson are, of course, your alphabet cards. And the specific ones we're going to use are C, H, and R, because C, we talk about roots, H, we talk about stems, and R, we talk about leaves. And so these are all the places where the fluid is moving around, right? So fluid is moving from the roots through the stems to the leaves, but fluid might also be moving from the leaves through the stems to the roots, right? So we're going to use these three parts of the plant to see how the fluids are moving throughout the plant. And then the other thing that you'll want is the Usborne Illustrated Dictionary of Biology. There are some excellent illustrations in here, and they talk a lot about the fluid transportation systems in plants. Before we get into those, of course, get out your journal and I will read some definitions to you. It's always good to define. Know what you're talking about. So osmosis, the flow of water from a high concentration area to a low concentration area through a semi-permeable membrane. And then we have capillary action, the movement of water through very narrow tubes. Fluids are moving through plants all the time. The two transport systems are xylem and phloem, okay? Two words, xylem and phloem. Xylem uses capillary action, so it draws water from the roots through the stems and to the leaves. The phloem is different, okay? The phloem is moving fluid throughout the plant, so not just from the bottom up, right? We think plants need water, they take the water from the bottom and then they put it out through the leaves, and that happens, but that's not the only thing that's happening, okay? Without the phloem, the plants would die, and we'll figure out why. So one system moves minerals, and mainly, I'm sure that's simplified, and the other system is mainly moving sugars. So, which is which? And if you've watched the photosynthesis lesson, or you know what's happening in the process of photosynthesis, then this will really help you to figure out which one of these things is which. So we have xylem that's taking things up from the ground. So what is it that's in the ground? Are the minerals floating around in the air mainly, or are the minerals in the ground mainly, right? So where's our mineral concentration? Where's the plant going to get the minerals from? So is it going to use the xylem, the capillary action, to bring up those minerals from the ground? Is it going to grab minerals from the air and take it down to the roots? Which way is it going? And then the phloem, the sugars, which is the glucose, right, that's produced with photosynthesis, sugars, is that coming from the roots? Now, maybe it is, right? We've learned about different kinds of roots, and photosynthesis can happen in roots. So it could be that there's sugar coming from the roots if the roots are photosynthesizing. It could be that there's sugar coming from the stems if the stems are photosynthesizing. But that sugar needs to get everywhere in the plant, right? So let's say you have a tree and it has all these beautiful leaves, and the leaves are photosynthesizing, but the tree really needs to grow some roots. How is it going to do that? It can't just do that with water. It can't just do that with minerals. That's not what's allowing that to grow. How do you grow? What do you need to do in order to grow? What do you need to do in order to do work? You need food. You need sugar. So The sugar from the leaves has to go through the stem to grow the stem and into the roots to grow the roots. So it can't just be bottom up, okay? We need this whole other system that also just transports fluid throughout the plant. Whatever parts of the plants need the sugar, it'll get taken from the parts that have produced the sugar to the parts that need it. And it's a dynamic process throughout the plant. Whereas the xylem is just pulling up water nutrients from the bottom and going throughout the plant. So it's just this one direction. The phloem is going everywhere, all over the plant. So just think about where the sugars and the minerals come from, and that will help you distinguish which is which, right? Where do the sugars and minerals come from, and where do they need to go? Why can't there just be one system that flows from the roots to the leaves? If there were only one system and they were only going from the roots to the leaves, what would happen to those roots? Would they be able to do any work? Would they be able to gather any nutrients? Would they be able to push any of that water up if they weren't also having that other system that's allowing them to get sugar and do the work? Next question. Transpiration is when water is pushed out of plants through tiny openings in their leaves called stomata. If water can exit this way, can it also be absorbed through the stomata? Why do some plants need a moist environment to stay healthy? So remember the roots that are aerial roots, right? What would happen if they were somewhere that wasn't, that didn't have any moisture? What would happen to them? What about these plants that are doing just a ton of photosynthesis? And in order to do photosynthesis, you need lots of water, right? So if they can just absorb water and have water there, then they can do that photosynthesis action more quickly. All right, in your journal, a couple things. The cell wall is important for plant shape. This is super fascinating. But cells depend on vacuoles to avoid wilting. See what happens when the vacuole loses too much fluid. So for this, we're going to look at the illustrated dictionary, learn about osmosis, and create an illustration of how fluids move in and out of cells. So for this, we're going to use the illustrated dictionary of biology. And on page 14, they start talking about vascular plants. The xylem and the phloem are the two transportation systems, which are the vascular systems transporting fluids. And then they talked about the roots, stems, and leaves, just like we talked about with our cards, roots, stems, and leaves. And then they talk about, on page 24 and 25, they talk more about plant fluid transportation, which is what we're talking about, transportation of fluids in the plants. And they talk about the xylem and the phloem. And then they have these really cool diagrams showing us what happens when plants are wilting, right? So these pictures over here are the diagrams of that. So when the plant has lots of water, then it has Turgor pressure, and that the state of the cells in a healthy plant when its cells can take in no more water. So each cell is then said to be turgid. Or turgid. That might be the more correct way to do it. Sorry. This means that water has passed by osmosis into the cell sap, which is dissolved minerals and sugars, in the cell's large central vacuole. Remember the vacuole in the cell? So it has all this fluid in there. And the vacuole has pushed out as far as it can go. So your vacuole is full. So you have lots of fluid, you have minerals, you have sugars. It has all the stuff that it needs, right? And then the Turgor pressure, so there's this outward pressure called Turgor pressure, is equaled by the opposing force of the rigid cell wall. So Turgor pressure is pushing out, and this vacuole, it's like nice and full. Think of like a water balloon. So it's like nice and full. And then the cell wall is pushing back on it, and that makes it a very strong cell. It has a really great shape, and it's strong. So I'm sure you've seen that in lots of plants. But then if they wilt, what is happening? Is that same pressure, that equalized pressure happening in the cell, or is it kind of collapsing in on itself and then falling over, right? So what's happening is that in wilting, a state of drooping found in plants subjected to certain conditions, such as excess heat. So when it's very hot, it's losing a lot of moisture. The plant is losing more water by transpiration than it can take in, and the Turgor pressure of its cell vacuoles drops. So it isn't pushing out anymore, right? It's lost a lot of that liquid and it's shrinking in on itself. The cells become limp and can no longer support the plant, so it will drop or droop, sorry. Then in plasmolysis, an extreme state of the plant, which will cause it to die, usually. I mean, when it gets so wilted that it's falling over, you're breaking certain structures in the plant so that even if the plant does revive, like a lot of those branches or stems will be lost because of the damage that was done to them. Such a plant is losing large amounts of water, not often only by transpiration and excess heat, but also by osmosis into the very dry soil or soil with a high concentration of minerals. The vacuoles of the plant cells then shrink so much that they pull the cytoplasm away from the cell walls. So that's the last one. Like, this is super extreme conditions. So you have this nice full vacuole, then the vacuole starts to shrink, then it gets really tiny and it's just destroying. It's like pulling in so much that the cell walls are becoming compromised. So this is why we want to have really good fluid transportation, and we want to have lots of fluids available to our plants. So next up, create a diagram of an entire plant, roots, stems, and leaves. Illustrate the movement of the fluids through the xylem and the phloem via osmosis, transpiration, capillary action, all of the stuff that's happening in there. Lots of different ways that it's getting moved around. Also include dangers to the transport system. So the water at the roots, is there an adequate water? Is it too dry outside? Is it too windy, too sunny? The aphids, are there aphids on there that are just sucking out the sap, stealing it all from the plant? Are the stomata covered? So just think about all of the ways that the water is moving in and out of the plant, right? So you've got the stomata that water is going out of in transpiration. You have the roots that are pulling up water through capillary action. You have osmosis taking water through the different cells, right? So you have the phloem and the xylem in the center, and then they're using osmosis to get it to all the cells throughout the plant, right? So just draw a diagram of your own showing that. I mean, it can just be any kind of plant. It doesn't have to be a real plant. Just show some roots, show a stem, show some leaves, yeah? And then just show where all those things are happening on there. All right, guys, transpiration of fluids. That's very basic. There's a lot that's happening in that transportation, but those are the main, most important parts of the transportation of fluids. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.